Hey, hi Noah, have you done?
Ooh, what's that?
I don't know.
That's a big echo. Oh, so now you have one. Okay, I had it. Ooh. I'm afraid to say something.
I was using my earbuds.
Okay. Oh, that's better.
Oh, fantastic.
Okay, good.
So, Noah, will you be able to put up our presentation? Okay.
Okay.
So, I think Noah just said that he's having trouble with the presentation. Okay, so the sound is great now. It's just a matter of Noah in the presentation. Would you be able to pull it up on your computer and then maybe I don't know how we would do this, but
it says I can share my screen.
But then you would disappear.
Probably.
Anyway,
That's okay, as long as we have something.
Yeah, let's briefly introduce ourselves and then we'll get into the presentation and talk about all of this later. So I'll let you start. Go ahead.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming to our presentation. I'm sound okay? Because I'm hearing myself twice.
You sound great, and based on the comments, it seems everyone can hear you perfectly as well.
Okay, great. I'll just trudge through it. My name is Ella Turen, and I'm the founder of Fanm, and I'm here today with my co-host Martine Jean, and we have a podcast called Fanm, which is about uplifting Haitian creatives in film and television. And I'm going to pass it to Martine right now.
And my name is Martine Jean. I am a filmmaker here in Los Angeles, formerly an attorney. And as Ella pointed out, I co-host the podcast Fanm with her. I think the echo is back, but go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, much better. Okay, so
how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm doing good. It's a wonderful afternoon here in LA, so can't complain.
Fantastic. And I don't think our admin has our presentation up and ready to load. Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, yep. I just switched computers and it looks like it works now. So I'm going to open up the presentation right now.
Yay. Fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem.
And thanks, everyone. Again, we're excited to have you here. Our presentation is going to be about Haitian women in the Haitian Revolution. And we're doing this presentation because a lot of times people know about men who were involved in the Haitian Revolution, such as Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines. And as women and Haitian women ourselves, who are very interested in Haitian history, Haitian culture, we wanted to make sure that the history of the women who were involved in the revolution was also present. So this is our presentation. We're going to be going through some of these women who are pretty well known in Haitian culture, but not that well known outside of that. And we're going to talk about their contribution to the revolution. And one of the things that I always like to talk about with the Haitian Revolution is this is our attempt as well to broaden the perception of what Haiti is and its legacy, because it is the first Black republic of the Western Hemisphere, although the media likes to portray it as the poorest country of the Western Hemisphere. But we like to think of it in terms of its legacy and the rich culture and heritage that it has contributed to revolutions, to the fight for liberation, to Black culture, Black history, to American history. So I will pass it off to Martine, who's going to start.
I'd like to point out that a lot of people know of Toussaint Louverture. You go everywhere and you say Toussaint Louverture and everyone knows who this person is. But few people know of the hidden figures of the Haitian Revolution, namely some of the women that we're going to go through today, not all of them, obviously. And I want to start out by talking about the land, because a people's history does not start with its enslavement. It starts with the land. And so the land at the time was inhabited by Taino and Arawak Indians. Those were the people who were indigenous and native to that land. And that massive land, which at the time in its entirety was called Haiti Kiskeya Uboyo, it was divided into 5 different territories or kingdoms, as you can see up here. It was the Marien, the Zaragua, the Managua, the Igwe, and the Magua. Now, in the Zaragua, the chief there at the time, his name was Boyo. And next door in Managua, the chief was Kaonabo. I'm sorry, Bohekio, not Boyo. Bohekio was the chief of the Zaragua, and he died. And once he died, the person who took over was his sister. And his sister's name was Anakaona, which means golden flower. Anakaona was Taino. She was born in 1474. And before her brother passed away, he married her off to Kaonabo, who lived in the territory next door and who was the chief next door, because Bohekio wanted to consolidate his power, because Bohekio at the time was already a powerful chief, but he wanted to consolidate his power even more. So he married Anakaona off to Kaonabo, but then he passed away. Kaonabo and Anakaona ended up having a child. Her name was Higwe Mota. And when her brother was still alive, she served as a reliable advisor to him. When Christopher Columbus and the Spaniards arrived on the territory, Anakaona, she was advising peace. She was telling her brother, we have to be peaceful. We have to try to coexist. And so they tried for a while. And in fact, the natives ended up intermarrying with some of the Spaniards until Anakaona and some of the other chiefs realized that their people were getting slaughtered, their people were getting murdered, their people were getting raped, and all of their resources were also getting stolen. And they all got together and decided that they needed to rebel. They needed to have a revolution. And unfortunately for them, in 1503, Governor Oviedo, who was the governor of the entire island and who was Spaniard, he suspected that the chiefs were planning a rebellion, and he ordered all of the chiefs captured and killed. And Anakaona, unfortunately, was one of those chiefs, as I stated at the time, and so she ended up getting arrested and she was hanged. But during her life, Anakaona was a poet, she was a religious leader, she was a composer, but she also tried to lead a rebellion, tried to lead a revolution, until she was unfortunately captured and killed. So Anakaona is the first person that we wanted to mention today when we talk about the women of the Haitian Revolution. Next slide, please. And we just talked about Anakaona. Next one.
So the next person who we want to talk about is Sisil Fatima, who was a Mambo at Wakaima. Now, a Mambo is a priestess of Vodou culture and religion. This is a culture and a way of life in the Haitian tradition, and it is an amalgam of African and indigenous religions and cultures. And what was really interesting about voodoo as well, in relation to the enslaved Africans who were on the island, they used it as a way to communicate, as a way to celebrate their gods and their culture. But in order for the slave masters and the colonialists to not find out what they were doing, because they were being punished for practicing their own religion, they masked all of the deities within the voodoo culture with Catholic and Christian symbols. So that's why you will see some of the deities represented by the Virgin Mary, when it's really representing an Ezuli or another goddess.
Until this day, it's still like that.
Until this day, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think that's a point of ingenuity, because as much as European and Western culture likes to categorize these religions and cultures as savage, as primitive, they were actually quite intelligent in ensuring that their own culture could thrive despite the oppression that they were facing. So Bwakaima was really a point that signaled the kickoff to the Haitian Revolution. It happened in August 14th, on August 14th, 1791. And this was a space where enslaved Africans came together to plan and plot their way of revenge against the colonialists and the slave masters. And it was led by Boukman, who is widely known as the priest who, the Voodoo priest who really led the ceremony. But Sisil Fatima was also there. She was also one of the people who led that ceremony and gathered all of the enslaved Africans to not only have this ceremony to plead to the gods, to plead for their support, but it was also an action-oriented meeting, a place to plot and plan how they were going to move through all of the different plantations in order to gain their liberation. And so when we talk about Sisil Fatima, she's very instrumental, because she wasn't on the sidelines as many might think. She was really central to this and participated in the ceremony by sacrificing an animal and also providing prayers to the gods and goddesses. And she, during the ceremony, it said that she was possessed by one of the Loa, which is what we call the goddesses and the gods and goddesses. She was possessed by one of the Loa called Ezuli, and Ezuli is the goddess of love. So Bwakaima is a significant moment in time, because it really kicks off the Haitian Revolution, which is a revolution that actually lasted for over a decade. And some people may not realize that this struggle for liberation took some time to take place, and it was really devastating to the land. It also obviously took a toll on the lives of the people who were there. But interestingly enough, it also, the success of the revolution was dependent on the collaboration of not only enslaved Africans, but also people of color who were considered Creoles, mixed people, and also other whites who had invested interests in taking down the French. So Bwakaima, Sisil Fatima, is an important point, and really we want to celebrate her as one of the people who helped kick off the Haitian Revolution.
And that actually is a great segue into our next slide. Because one thing that Ella said that I will repeat is that a lot of people hear 1804 and they think, oh yeah, the Haitian Revolution happened in 1804 and Haiti got its independence. But it was a decade-long battle. It was a culmination of multiple insurrections and fights and, mass killings. It's something that took time. It took strategic minds, and it took a lot of collective effort. And one of those strategic minds, her name was Suzanne Santebile. Now, I'm going to list this woman's accomplishments first before I point out how old she was. So Suzanne Santebile, she was born in 1781, and she was born free. She was a freedom fighter. She was a sergeant in the army of Toussaint Louverture and eventually became a lieutenant in the army of Toussaint Louverture. At the age of 15, she was married off to Charles Belair, who was also in the army of Toussaint Louverture. Now, both of them, that couple, they were a force to be reckoned with because they were both instrumental in the Haitian Revolution because of their military mind and their military background. And as a result, they both became targets of the French army. And they were, in fact, chased by the French army and captured in an ambush. Now, the wife, Suzanne Santebile, she was the one who was captured first. And her husband, Charles, when he realized that she had been captured, he decided to turn himself in as well because he did not want his wife going without him. And so they were both taken and they were both sentenced to death. And he was killed by firing squad because at the time the tradition was that the men would be killed by firing squad and the women would be killed, would be beheaded, which I guess they considered was better. I don't know. I don't know the logic behind that. But in order
definitely
to be,
of the times,
it's
a method
just,
of the times.
Yeah, absolutely. And but the tradition was that the women would get blindfolded and then they would get beheaded. But she refused to be blindfolded. She said, I want to look at you in the eyes when you are doing this. And so they did not blindfold her and she died with her eyes wide open. And this was in 1802, about 2 years before Haiti's official independence. She was 21 years old when all of this happened. She was 21 years old. At 21, I could not figure out my life. I did not know what I was doing with my life at
Definitely
all.
not doing that.
I was a brand new immigrant to the United States. My parents were pushing me to do one thing, being immigrant parents, you know. I had no idea what I was going to do with my life, but this woman accomplished so much in her short life. She is one of two women, only two women on Haitian currency. It's her and the woman who is considered the mother of the Haitian flag, Catherine Flan. They are the only two women on Haitian currency. And Sanité is on the 10 gourde bill. If you go to Haiti or if you ever see Haitian currency, the 10 gourde bill has Santebile on it. So certainly one of the hidden figures of the Haitian Revolution that we want to highlight.
Next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you.
And the next person that we also want to highlight is Dédé Basile, aka Défilé la Folle. So the name Défilé la Folle means défilé the crazy. And défilé means, it kind of means modeling. It kind of means to walk. It kind of means to take off on a runway, a person taking off on a runway. So in order to understand who this person was, it's important to understand certain things about Haitian culture. So we have an issue of ableism in our culture. We absolutely do. Because if someone has a problem, an illness, whether it's physical, mental, we immediately latch onto that and we give that person a nickname based on that illness. And that nickname stays with you for life. Like, for instance, if you have a problem with your legs and you walk a little crooked, you're going to be known as Gimpy for the rest of your life. That's
a rite of passage.
It's a rite of passage, but again, really, it is ableism, and it's something that we need to rid ourselves of. But we have not done that because I can tell you the last time I went to Haiti, I had gained a lot of weight, and I was walking into my mother's neighborhood, and some of her neighbors did not know I was coming. And one of them exclaimed, "Oh, abason bef kap vin Veronique la," which is Creole, meaning, "Oh my God, there's a big cow coming to Veronique's house," right? Because Haitians don't care. They will call you those names, and you can't act like you're mad or upset about it because it only makes things worse.
Well, they'll keep doing it.
Yeah, they'll keep doing it, and then all the kids in the neighborhood will get into it, and then you'll be walking down the street, and the kids are chasing you, yelling it. That's just what happens. And so that's in order to understand why this woman, Dédé Basile, was also known as Défilé la Folle, Défilé the Crazy. Now, she was born into slavery, and at the time, the area was called Cap Français. Cap Français is where I was born because it's also Cap Haitien today. It's known as Cap Haitien. And she made a living selling goods to the soldiers of Dessalines' army. But she also, and Ella can correct me on this, Ella made an extensive presentation on this woman either a year or two ago at Sonoma University. She was also a freedom fighter. She was also part of Dessalines' army. And one of the things that she was known for is that the minute they said go, she was ready to go. She was like, I'm out. Hence the name Défilé, which means I'm ready. Let's go. Let's do this. And there are different accounts as to how she became mentally ill. You know, some people say, well, she was the victim of a physical trauma, of a rape, perhaps when she was younger. And then others said she witnessed a traumatic event, which is why she developed a mental illness. But there is nothing accurate that can tell us why it is that she had that mental illness, but she did. And so as part of Dessalines' army, we all know that Dessalines was ambushed in 1806, and he was ambushed by people who were actually his former comrades, like Pétion, Boyer, Rigaud, and their acolytes. At that time, Dessalines had become emperor. If you know the history of Haiti, Dessalines had become emperor, and those guys used to be part of his military and to be with him. But you know, at that time, they all banded together and decided to kill him. So Dessalines was ambushed right outside of modern-day Port-au-Prince, and he was killed. And then his body was dragged and mutilated and then left to rot. And during all of this, while we're calling this woman crazy, she is the only one with the presence of mind to show up and grab the pieces of the emperor's body and put them in a bag so that he can get a burial that is dignified, that is respectful, that honored the ancestors. She is the only one with the presence of mind to do that. And so I always ask, who is crazy, right? If we're talking about crazy, who is crazy? If the others can not only ambush their emperor, murder him, mutilate his body, leave his body to rot, but here's the one you're calling crazy who shows up and picks up the pieces of this man that she admired, who is crazy? And so for me, Dede Basile is one of those really important figures in the Haitian Revolution. She died in 1816. She had a couple of children as well, and they also ended up serving in the military. But certainly she is one person that I honor every time I talk about the Haitian Revolution.
Dede Basile is definitely one of my favorite characters, heroines in the Haitian Revolution, because of just her fierceness and her bravery. I really see her as epitomizing both the pain and the trauma of slavery and also the courage and resistance of revolution. And that brings us to our last freedom fighter, who is Catherine Flon. And Catherine Flon is considered the mother of the Haitian flag. She was actually the goddaughter to Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who after Toussaint Louverture, who is, as Martine had stated before, he's one of the most known figures in the Haitian Revolution. In 1801, I believe, that was the first time actually that Haiti declared its independence. And then Toussaint Louverture was trying to be a diplomat. In the same way that Anna Kawana was trying to be a diplomat, right? He was like, we need to forge alliances if we are to survive as a nation. And so when he declared independence the first time in 1801, the French tricked him, arrested him, took him, and put him in a prison in the French Alps where he died. Then came Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who had a completely different take, from Toussaint Louverture. He was not about diplomacy. In fact, his motto was coupe tête boule caille, which meant cut their heads and burn down the houses. His strategy was, when we see the French coming in the waters, when we see them approaching the island, rather than allow them the opportunity to come to the island and pillage us and take our people as prisoners, we will burn everything down. So when they get here, they can't find anything. So this is the scene in the last 2 or 3 years of the revolution where we're at, right? We have Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who is leading the nation, who finally, again, declares independence. By the end of 1803, that is when the last battles are fought. And it's clear that the French and also to some extent the Spanish and the English are not going to be able to retain their control over Hispaniola at the time when we're talking about the two parts of the island together. So how do you mark this moment? This is where Catherine Flon comes in. As Dessalines' goddaughter, he asked her to create a flag, a representation of liberty, a representation of this moment of freedom that happened in on May 18th, 1803, which is why Haitians celebrate Flag Day on May 18th. There are two big holidays, besides some of the other ones that are celebrated around the world. But in Haitian culture and history, there are two big holidays for us. Yep. January 1st,
yes,
which most of you know as New Year's Day. We don't see it as New Year's Day only.
No, not at all.
We see it as the day that officially Haitian independence was declared. And it's a big deal. It's a big moment in our history. We drink what we call soup jumu, which is squash soup. It's a golden squash soup that is also made of pasta and meats and vegetables. And it's what the enslaved Africans collected that they weren't allowed to eat when they were enslaved. They collected all that food, put it in the soup, and that became what they ate to celebrate their freedom. And it's why we eat it every year. But I don't know about you, Martine, but I always feel like if I don't eat, like I must find it, even if I must go to another state to get it, if I have to scrounge and make it, because it's not going to be good for the rest of the year if I don't have my squash soup.
Yeah, it's the same thing for me, and it's happened that it's January 1st and I'm overseas. I remember one year I was in South Africa and it was January 1st and I started scrambling, looking for things to make the soup, and my hosts were like, "Is she okay? Like, what are you doing?" I said, "I need to make the soup."
Haitians will go to lengths to get the soup.
Yeah, it's a way to feel connected with other Haitians wherever you are in the world. Yeah.
So that's the first one. And the second one is May 18th, Flag Day. We're fiercely proud of our flag. And this is the reason why. The Haitian flag is kind of based off the French flag. And if you think of the French and their moment of revolution and their tagline, they talk about fraternité, égalité, right? So at the same time that the Haitian flag is building upon these French values, it's also rejecting and resisting them. And the way that they did that was to take the French flag and pull out the white in the middle of it. The white obviously symbolizing the slave master, the colonialists, the imperialists, cutting out the white part of the flag, putting the blue and red together, symbolizing the coming together. As I said before, the Creoles and mulattoes had to come together with the enslaved Africans to really build a coalition to bring about this freedom. And then in the middle of that is the coat of arms with the tagline and the motto of Haiti, "L'union fait la force," which means unity equals strength. And so this flag is symbolic because it represents our past and our present and our future. Our past is in resistance, in revolution. Our present is the people themselves and the land. And our future is also thinking about a future where all people are free, right? Because one of the things that I really loved about the Constitution, the Haitian Constitution, the way it was formulated, and Dessalines' thinking, and the other leaders who were with him as they were putting this together, they decided that any Black person that came to the island, came to Haiti, you would be free automatically. You didn't have to try to gain citizenship. You didn't have to go through all these forms. You would automatically be free.
Yep.
And I think that is such a bold statement to make. And if we think about the current times that we're living in, when we're really going to have to be thinking about new ways of doing things, about new ways of thinking about borders, about collaboration, about people, about Black lives.
Yeah.
When we think about this, they were forward thinking in their thinking about liberation and what that meant for all Black people. So go ahead, Martine.
I was going to say, I encourage people to look into what groups of other people who were persecuted around the world who decided to take Haiti up on its offer. Because Haiti said, anybody who wants to be free, come onto this land and you are free. Please research and see what groups of people took advantage of that. And then look at Haiti's makeup now, and you can tell that generations of those people are still very much there. Now, we can talk about the politics and the class and all of that, of what's happening now, but we really need to delve into the groups of people from other countries who were persecuted, who took refuge in Haiti.
And just to close, Catherine Flon is revered and celebrated in Haiti as the mother of the Haitian flag. She sewed it together. There are streets named after her, schools named after her. And of course, as Martine mentioned, she's the only other woman who is on Haitian currency.
Yep.
I think I want to close, and then Martine, please add any final comments that you have. That we wanted to highlight the women of the Haitian Revolution to show how women were involved in this freedom movement. But I think broadly speaking, the Haitian Revolution is important and still relevant today when we think about the liberation of Black people as a moment that we're going through right now in American history. And there wouldn't be as a robust American history if there wasn't the Haitian Revolution.
Absolutely.
The Haitian Revolution resulted in France, as they retreated with their tail between their legs, they had to sell the Louisiana Purchase to America. And the Louisiana Purchase is explicitly what allowed America to expand to the West. So we're sitting here in California right now. There might not be a California. There might not be a Los Angeles. There might not be a Hollywood if it weren't for the Haitian Revolution.
Right.
And this is why it's important to understand how the two are inextricably linked. And we need to continue to see what we can learn from that freedom struggle and how we can apply it to our current times today.
And the Louisiana Purchase also explains why when you go to New Orleans, you hear Creole, and it's a Creole that we understand as well as Haitians, that we speak. You see the Vodou influence. You see just the Haitian culture imbued all throughout that region. So absolutely, the two are intertwined. So we'd like to open it for questions.
Yeah, we have some questions here. I just found the question section.
Yes.
And there are some questions. So let's go through them. Can you talk about, this is from Jill, can you talk about your research process and source materials from your presentation? How well known are the women within Haiti? I will say that I've been doing this work for quite some time. So some of it is from oral history, which I think is very important because in academia it's not always as valued, but these are partially stories that have also been passed down to us from generation to generation. And there are some very good scholars who have written books about both the Haitian Revolution and also women within the Haitian Revolution. And then I would say the third thing for me is there are some very good blogs online and people who have done research and shared it through digital means that have added to this experience. And also artists, I will say, who have created art about these women to help us visually see who these women are. I want to give a lot of praise to them.
For me, I will say that Haitian history is very important to us as Haitians. I was born and raised in Haiti. I immigrated to the United States for university, and I ended up staying. But when I was a child, they would beat it into my head. My history was repetition all day long, chaque jour, nonstop. Okay, Haitian history it was something that we had to learn constantly. We had our history books, and we were taught every little aspect of our history. It's a source of huge pride for Haitians. Secondly, I will mention a historian by the name of Baïna Belot. She is a Haitian historian. She is the mother of all things Haitian history. And she actually has a book called The Sheroes of the Haitian Revolution, where she focuses solely on the women. She talks about all of the women that we mentioned here, but also other women of the Haitian Revolution. So that has been a great resource for us as well. She has a number of videos on YouTube where she discusses different aspects of Haitian history. And as I said, she has a book called The Sheroes of the Haitian Revolution, which was also a source for us.
So that also answers the second question. Do you have any readings to recommend on women in the Haitian Revolution? I think Baïna Bellows is the perfect one. And also I'll mention Edwidge Dantika, who has a book on Anakauna. That's a great book to read as well. And Edwidge Dantika is one of our most treasured writers who writes about history and culture of Haiti. Next question is, we hear a lot about negative American attitudes to the Haitian Republic post-revolution. Were there any positive American supporters, for instance, pro-Republicans, during or after the Haitian Revolution that you know of? How known was the Haitian Revolution to enslaved Africans on American plantations? And that was submitted by Owen. I'll add that this is a great question. Two people who I will bring up who were supporters of the Haitian Revolution were not necessarily part of our government, but Frederick Douglass was a huge supporter of the Haitian Revolution, actually wrote about it extensively. If you do some Google searching in library archives in library archives, you'll be able to find in some of his writings, his discussions about the Haitian Revolution and its importance. So he was a key person during that time who was recognizing or immediately post, who recognized the importance of the Haitian Revolution, again, not just as Black history, but also as American history, but he also recognized how it was going to be impacting the Black diaspora. And the other person that I'll mention, interestingly enough, not necessarily related to the Haitian Revolution, but we just learned recently that Madam C.J. Walker, who was in America, the first woman millionaire, she actually was making hair products and health and beauty products and was exporting them to other countries. And one of them was also Haiti. And her impetus was really to create not only better conditions for Black women, but also for them to be entrepreneurs and to support themselves. So those are two people that I would say were definitely allies of Haitians in the Haitian Revolution.
Yeah, and certainly as early as 1824, a lot of Blacks were trying to immigrate into Haiti, having heard of that a group of enslaved people got their liberation, and that the minute you hit Haitian soil, you were free. And again, this is as early as 1824. And as Ella just pointed out about Madam C.J. Walker, that's one aspect of her history that it frustrates me that we never talk about, is how the African Americans at the time here in the United States, how they were making inroads in places like Haiti and in other parts of the Caribbean, how they were trying to develop entrepreneurship and a relationship with Blacks in Haiti and Blacks in other parts of the diaspora. We never hear about that. And I wish we would,
So the last question that's here to wrap us up is when did the United States start allowing migration from Haiti? Who came first, where, and why? That's a very good question. I don't know the exact pinpointed time, but I know that even in the late 1800s, there was migration from Haiti to the United States. And as we also track the Great Migration from the South after emancipation to northern and Midwestern states, you also see Haitians and actually Caribbeans at large also being part of that migration. Something that I learned this year was that there was actually a good number of Haitians who migrated to and settled in Harlem, New York. So there are a lot of Haitians in Harlem, Boston, also Florida. But even in those early days in the late 1800s, there was a huge population of Haitians who were both culturally active and politically active in what was going on at the time. And I think this is important because the media kind of portrays Haitians as boat people or people who are just in this last wave of migration. And it's important to note that Haitians have been part of American culture and society for quite some time.
Thank you so much, everyone. Follow us on Instagram.
Thank you for coming. We hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.